Chazal tell us that the Be'er, the well that supplied the Yidden with water in the Midbar, so that well was B'schus Miriam in the merit of Miriam, and this is why immediately after Miriam's passing, the pasuk says, "V'lo haya mayim la'eda," the people didn't have any water. And in a similar way, we are also told about the Ananei HaKavod, about the clouds of glory, that they were B'schus Aaron, and when Aaron passes away, so the Ananei HaKavod also go away. Nevertheless, we find that the Be'er, the well, is there even after Miriam passes away. We find that the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, are there even after Aaron passes away, because as Chazal tell us, that Chazru Shneim B'schus Moshe, that both the well and the clouds returned in the schus and the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, what about Rashi? So at first glance, it would seem like Rashi in his Pirush al HaTorah, which is learning Pshutish al Mikra, is also accepting this view of Chazal, and that is, on the pasuk Lo haya mayim la'eda, that the people don't have any water, Rashi explains, this teaches us that the past 40 years they had the water in the schus of Miriam, so when she passes away, now there's no water for the people. In a similar way, on the pasuk Vayishma Knani, Rashi says, what did the Knani hear? He heard that Aaron passed away, the Ananei HaKavod had departed, so we see that again, that it came obviously in the schus of Aaron. Nevertheless, we find that in regards to the Be'er, we see clearly that it's there after the passing of Miriam, as it says further in Chumash, by the Nes of Eshed HaNecholim. This is a miracle where the well had brought up the bones and blood of the enemies of the Yidden. So we see clearly that the well was there. We also find Rashi on the words, Umibamois Hagai B'Sdei Moyov. Rashi explains that this is the place where Moshe passed away. And then the Be'er is completely bottled, there's no more the well. In other words, that clearly after Miriam's passing, we still do have the Be'er until the time that Moshe Rabbeinu passes away. Which makes it sound like Rashi is accepting this idea that the Be'er came back. Hashem brought it back in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore it also makes sense that the Ananei HaKavod would have also come back in the schus of Moshe, because it makes sense to say that the schus of Moshe would have helped not only for bringing back the Be'er, but also for bringing back the Ananei HaKavod. Says the Rebbe, the question is, what seems to be surprising is, that in regards to the Be'er, in regards to the well, the Torah tells us clearly how it came back. The people didn't have water. They came and they complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, etc. And they quarreled and they fought. And the Eibishter says to Moshe, Kachas Amata, to take the stick and then to bring forth the water and so on. And finally, the Yidden have water once again from the rock. Whereas regarding the Ananei HaKavod, it doesn't seem to say anywhere, neither in Chumash or even in Rashi, how it came back and when it came back. Another thing we need to understand is, just like when the time there was no more water after Miriam passes away, this causes that all the Yidden gather and they start fighting and arguing and complaining that there's no water. Seemingly, when the Ananei HaKavod, when the clouds of glory would have left, when Aaron passes away, this also should have brought out some unrest and complaining by the Yidden. So why is it that we don't find that the Yidden aren't complaining at the time when the Ananei HaKavod go away? Says the Rebbe, seemingly we would be able to explain that al pi pshutei shel mikra, the Ananei HaKavod in fact did not come back after leaving when Aaron passes away. And the reason simply would be is because there was no need anymore for these clouds. Why is that? Rashi had explained already earlier that the clouds had surrounded the Yidden from all four sides, also from on top and from on bottom. And what this had achieved was, number one, it protected the Yidden so that they're not being scorched by the hot sun, the heat and the sun, etc. They're not being burnt by the heat of the sun. Number two, Rashi also brings that the clouds were shafim b'ksusam, were rubbing their clothes and pressing their clothes. In addition to this, there was another cloud that went ahead to guide them, to show them the way. And of course, there was also the point that the clouds smoothed out the way, smoothing out the mountains and so on, and protecting them from all harmful things. Man michas hagavoya, as Rashi brings, it would flatten the high mountains, it would lift up the low valleys, and also kill out the snakes and the scorpions. However, once Aaron passes away, then the Yidden don't actually need all of these things that the clouds were doing for them, because Hoir Hahar, the place where Aaron passes away, is already at the border of Eretz Edom. It's already at the very, very edge of the desert, very close to places that are settled. And obviously it's a place, since it's no longer in the midst of the desert, so they also don't have the heat and the sun as it is in the Midbar. It'll be much weaker over here. Says the Rebbe, and it's not only because of the place where they are, at the edge of the desert, but also the time of the year when Aaron passes away. Aaron passes away, b'chodesh hachamishi b'echad lachodesh, that's Rosh Chodesh Av. That's very close to the time where generally the heat of the summer is already getting weaker. As we know, as the Gemara says, Mechamisha Asar ba'avo elach toshash koyach shel chamo, that at the 15th day of month of, so now the koyach of the sun, the heat of the sun is weak already. So when we're holding so close to Chamisha Asar ba'av, it's obviously not that same state of heat that was earlier. And the Rebbe preempts a question. The Rebbe says this is not a contradiction from what Rashi says in the Parshas Noach. Rashi speaks about the different seasons, and Rashi explains the time of Choim, the time of heat. Rashi says this is the end of the summer, which is mid of the whole of Elul and up until mid Tishrei. Says Rashi that the world at that time is very, very hot. And he brings a Gemara that says, Shilhi Kaito, that the end of the summer is more difficult than the summer itself. So seemingly then, Av is a very hot time. But the Rebbe says this is no contradiction, because over there, as Rashi himself explains the reason, Shah Oilam Cham B'Yoysa, the whole world is hot. Why is that? Because the air had become heated up already over the whole summer, and the people also went through a very, very, hot summer. And therefore, so now at the end of the summer, it's all of that added up together, so now they're feeling much hotter. But the actual heat of the sun itself is becoming weaker at this time of the year, from Chamisha Asar ba'av ve'elach, as we see clearly. And therefore, in our case, since until Aaron passes away, again, Rashi said that the summer up until now is what's going to make the end of the summer hotter. But what happened by the Yidden at this point? The clouds were protecting the Yidden from the heat of the sun until Aaron passes away. And therefore, we wouldn't say that the whole air was already completely heated up, and especially the people themselves weren't heated up because of the heat of the summer that had just passed. And again, since from Chamisha Asar ba'av ve'elach, the heat of the sun, the shining of the sun, is not with the same strength, therefore they also wouldn't need the Ananei HaKavod, so that the heat and the sun doesn't harm them. Furthermore, the Rebbe says that Yidden also didn't need as much the Ananei HaKavod for cleaning their clothes and pressing their clothes, because if there would be the situation where a Yid needs new clothes, we know there's the concept that their clothes didn't wear out. But if they would have worn out at this point when they're so close to civilization already, so they can now buy new clothes from one of the nearby cities from the Goyim. Also, says the Rebbe, they also didn't need as much the miracle that the cloud should show them the way, because once again, they're already in a place where there are paved roads, they're close to the cities and so on. And by the same token, they also don't need the clouds to be killing out the snakes and scorpions, again, because they're not in the midst of the desert anymore. They're very close to cities and civilizations. Says the Rebbe, again the Rebbe is preempting a question, even though they needed the Anon, seemingly, the cloud, to flatten out the mountains. And as Rashi explains in regards to Hahar, the mountain where Aaron passed away, Rashi says that even though there was a cloud going ahead of them and flattening the mountains, nevertheless there were 3 mountains that were left over. And we're speaking about Hahar as well as Har Nevoy for the burial of Moshe, from which we see that the cloud seemingly did go along with the Yidden even after Aaron passes away, until the time when they come to Har Nevoy, where Moshe passes away. So clearly it sounds like the cloud was there, and it just didn't flatten Har Nevoy, but it did flatten the other mountains. So the Rebbe says this isn't such a strong question, because B'doichek, at least, we could have explained that the fact that the cloud flattened the mountains, besides for Har Nevoy, does not mean that it happened when the Yidden arrived to that particular mountain, but rather it happened in advance. We know that the cloud went a journey of 3 days ahead of the Yidden. So it could have been even before Aaron passes away, while they still had the clouds, it could have already gone ahead and flattened all the mountains that are going to be necessary to be flattened. Says the Rebbe, this would actually help us understand the order of how Rashi mentions the mountains that weren't flattened out. There's Har Sinai, and Rashi says Har Nevoi, which is where Moshe passed away, and Har Hor, where Aaron passes away. But according to the sequence, to the order of how things happen, yes, Har Sinai is first, but Har Nevoi should be last, after Har Hor. But based on what we just said, according to this svara that the cloud would have gone ahead before Aaron passed away, flattened all the other mountains besides Har Nevoi, the Rebbe says we can explain it in the following way. By saying Har Nevoi before Har Hor, Rashi is coming to hint to this idea that the fact that the cloud left Har Nevoi for the burial of Moshe was not sometime later when the Yidden arrived at Har Nevoi, which would be after the passing of Aaron, but rather it's in the same time when it leaves over Har Hor for the burial of Aaron, meaning it's all before Aaron passes away. So Rashi is sort of hinting this by throwing in Har Nevoi, mentioning it even before Har Hor. So in summary, at this point of the Sicha, the Rebbe has been suggesting that possibly because they're already so close to civilization, they don't need the clouds anymore, and therefore there are no clouds after Aaron passes away. However, says the Rebbe, in truth, we have to say that the clouds did return and accompany the Yidden even after Aaron passes away. And the Rebbe says a number of points. Number one, b'pashtus, when we speak about the cloud was going ahead of them, lanchoisom aderech, to show them the way, it's not only to make sure that they don't get lost in the midbar where there are no proper roads, but generally to show them the way, the direction in which Hashem wants them to go. And since after Aaron passes away, there's still quite a number of journeys, they do still need a cloud to show them which direction Hashem wants them to go. Number two, Rashi tells us clearly that after Aaron passed away, the Yidden actually went back Derech Yamsuf, on the way of the Yamsuf, Sheva Masois, they took 7 journeys back into the direction of the desert. So clearly they're back in the desert. So therefore all the reasons we said before that they wouldn't need the clouds don't apply anymore. Number 3, the Rebbe says, the Anonim, the clouds, were protecting the Yidden also from war with the Umas Oilam, with the Goyim. As Rashi had explained by Melchemes HaMolek, where it says, say he lochem Amalek, go out and wage war against Amalek. What does it mean, go out? Rashi explains, say minon, and go out of the cloud and go fight Amalek. Which tells us that as long as Yidden were surrounded with the clouds, the Goyim were not able to come and fight with them. And as Rashi also explained earlier, that the Anon, the cloud, would absorb all of the chitzim, all of the arrows, all of the stones thrown at them, that when Mitzrayim was trying to throw things at them. And this is also why, in the story we mentioned before, when Aaron passes away, as soon as Aaron passes away, what happens? By Yishma Kanani, the Kanani come along and fight the Yidden, and as Rashi explained, because when they saw that there was no Anani HaKavod anymore, they think, Nitna Rishus Le'ilachem B'Yisrael, that now they have the permission to go and fight the Yidden. So clearly Anani HaKavod are there to protect the Yidden from wars, and therefore in our case also the Yidden would still need the Hanani HaKavod to protect them from the later wars. Another point, says the Rebbe, the idea of having the cloud by the 42 journeys was not only to show them where to go, but also, as Torah tells us at length in Parshas Ba'aloischa, to tell them also when to go, and how long each one of their campings should be for, and then the travels, which clearly this would have all been necessary in all the further journeys until they actually come into Eretz Yisrael. And finally, point number 5, the Rebbe says, most importantly, Rashi tells us in Parshas Balak. Now this is clearly after Aaron passes away. This isn't the story where the Yidden sinned with the daughters of Moav, and they're going to be punished. The pasuk says, "V'hoika oisam la'Hashem neged Hashemesh." What does this mean? So Rashi explains that the sun is going to notify who were the ones that sinned, and how did that happen? Ha'anon nikpa miknegdai, the cloud would sort of fold away, would move away from next to that person who had sinned. The sun would shine directly on him, and that's how they knew who actually sinned. So we see that Rashi says clearly that the cloud was there even after Aaron passes away, and the clouds were protecting usually from the sun, and in this particular case, the cloud would move away to allow the sun to shine in. So therefore, we're back to square one. The question is back on, why isn't it mentioned anywhere that the Ananei HaKavod came back, how they came back, and why it is also, as we said before, why when the Ananei HaKavod leave, didn't this cause a major upset by the Yidden to complain about it. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this all by first looking at a diuk and a change in Rashi's expressions ala Torah when he speaks about the clouds. In a number of places, Rashi refers to the clouds as Ananei HaKavod, as clouds of glory. But in a number of places, Rashi just says anonim, just plain clouds, doesn't call them clouds of glory. Says the Rebbe, these two expressions we also find in Medrashei Chazal that speak about the 7 clouds, that in some Medrashei Chazal the girsa is Shiva anonim hoyu, that there were 7 clouds, or a similar expression. And in some places it says Shiva ananei kavod hoyu, 7 clouds of glory, or a similar expression to that. Now Rashi, in his Pirush ala Torah, so he writes, Shiva anonim ksuvim, there were 7 clouds. So clearly when he's speaking about all 7 clouds, he's calling them 7 clouds, and yet sometimes he's referring to them as clouds of glory. Says the Rebbe, we could explain it in the following way. The difference between clouds, just plain clouds, and Ananei HaKavod, we could explain very simply. Ananei HaKavod, clouds of glory, means, as understood simply, that the whole purpose of these clouds is to bring out the honor of the Bnei Yisrael. That is, there were clouds that were there to protect the Yidden. There were clouds that were there to make sure that the Yidden had all of their basic necessities. Now, obviously, if the clouds are doing this, this clearly would also bring out how much Hashem loves them and the honor and the glory of the Yidden, if Hashem is taking care of them in that way. But nevertheless, these clouds are still supplying and doing a specific job that's absolutely necessary. But then there were clouds that the whole point of them was just kavod. It was all there just to show how much honor Hashem is giving to the Bnei Yisrael. From this we understand that not all of the clouds that were accompanying the Yidden are considered Ananei HaKavod, clouds of glory. That is, the cloud that's going ahead and flattening the mountains or killing the snakes and scorpions, that's not one of the Ananei HaKavod, because again, this is doing something that's an absolute necessity to allow the Yidden, to help the Yidden to go through the Midbar. So too the clouds that are protecting them from the heat of the sun or from the Goyim during war. You wouldn't say it's only for the glory of the Yidden, for the honor of the Yidden. Rather, these are also for other absolute necessities and benefits that the Yidden need. And therefore, in some of these places, Rashi uses the word onon stam, meaning just plain onon, because in these cases, it was there for a necessity. It wasn't there just for the honor of the Yidden. And the Rebbe gives examples now. So for example, when it says, Tsevi hilochim ba'amalek, go fight Amalek, Rashi said, say mina onon, go from the cloud. It doesn't say from the cloud of glory. Because again, the cloud would have been separating between the Yidden and going protecting them, but there's a concept of go out of the cloud. When Rashi speaks about the arrows that were thrown at the Yidden, so again, Zerkim Chisim, they threw arrows, v'ha onon mekablam, it doesn't say Ananei HaKavod, it just says onon. It speaks about flattening the mountain. So again, this was on the pasuk Hoira Hor. So Rashi says that even though there was a cloud going ahead of them and flattening the mountains, nevertheless it left a few mountains, as we said before. But which term does Rashi again use? Sheha onon hoylech lefneim. And when we said before about when the Yidden sinned and the cloud would fold over and allow the sun to shine, again Rashi uses the term ha'onon nikpal. And finally, in the story of Amalek, of those that were lagging behind, the ones that were weak and behind the Yidden, etc. So, and the Amalek was able to attack them. So what does Rashi say over there? Shahaya ha'onon poilton. The cloud had sort of spat them out and put them out of the cloud. So again, it's in a situation where it's protecting them from the Goyim, and certain people, certain Yidden were thrown out. Whereas the clouds that departed, when Aaron passed away, what do we say over here? What went away? Nistalku, Ananei HaKavod. The clouds of glory went away. That means not all the clouds went away, only those clouds that were there, particularly only for the honor of the Yidden. but not the clouds that were there for the basic necessities of the Yidden. And in fact, the Anane Kavod that left when Aaron passed away, they in fact did not come back. And now we can also understand simply why the Yidden cannot come and complain, and we don't find them complaining when the Anane Kavod go away, as they did complain when the well stopped producing the water, because again, this is not something that they needed for their basic necessities. So again, what the Rebbe is saying is that out of the clouds of the Yidden, some of them were necessary, and they're not called Anane Kavod, and they, in fact, did stay after Aaron passed away. What left was the Anane Kavod, the ones that were just there to show extra honor for the Yidden. With this, the Rebbe says we could actually answer a question. Rebbe Leo Mizrahi, one of the Mefarshei Rashi, asked the following question. Since there were clouds from all four sides, and one on top and one on bottom, and we know that a sukkah is supposed to be similar to the clouds, as Rashi himself says, on the pasuk, he says, Anane Kavod. So the question is, a sukkah, asks the Mizrahi, should have to have echad mulmailo, one on top, one on bottom, and four from all four sides, whereas we know that the halacha is you actually only need two walls. And then a third wall that's just a tefach wide. Why don't we need the full amount similar to the clouds? The Rebbe says we could even add to this question. Why don't we make a zeicher to that seventh cloud that went ahead of the Yidden? But based on what we said, says the Rebbe, it's very understood. The zeicher that we are making is for the Anane HaKavod, for the clouds of glory. Again, this means those clouds that were there only for the honor of the Yidden, not that was there for the necessities of the Yidden. The cloud that went ahead of them, and so too some of the other clouds that were around them, also needed to make sure and take care of the basic necessities of the Yidden, as we explained. And therefore the walls around the sukkah is not going to be the same amount of Anane HaKavod that they had. Especially the Rebbe says that there could have actually been changes with the amount of clouds that were needed as a basic necessity, and which ones were Anane HaKavod during the various different journeys. That means that, for example, in a certain journey, when they didn't need protection on a certain side, that means over here both protection from the sun as well as protection from the enemies. So then when there's a cloud on that side, that's considered Anane HaKavod. That's only there then for the honor of the Yidden. Whereas some of the other ones that are necessary at the time, they are going to be considered just plain anonim. Says the Rebbe, with this we could also explain a diuk in the Rashi that we mentioned earlier. It says, Vayishma Knani, the Knani heard. What did he hear? Shenistalko Anane Kavod, that the clouds of glory had departed. And he thinks, Shenitno Rishus Leilachem B'Yisrael, he thinks now he has permission to fight against the Yidden. Seemingly, Rashi should have said something bigger than that. Rashi should have said not that he has permission to fight against the Yidden, he should have said he now has the ability to fight against the Yidden and permission. In other words, since Yidden before were surrounded by the clouds, it was impossible to fight against the Yidden. So it should have it should have said, Vayishma Kanani, now he hears that he has the ability to attack the Yidden. Says the Rebbe, but based on what we said, it's actually understood. Even after the Anane HaKavod were no longer there, we say that the Ananim that were necessities for the Yidden were still there. So the cloud that would be there to protect the Yidden from war was still there. So what does the Kanani think? That since since the extra clouds are gone, the honor is gone. Meaning Hashem is not showing so much honor to the Yidden anymore. That would seem to indicate that now he has permission to go and fight the Yidden. Hashem is, so to speak, not so satisfied with the Yidden anymore. As far as ability to fight them, because of the other clouds, well, that nothing changed from before. Just like it would have been difficult before, the same thing will be difficult now. You're going to say, then how is he even trying to fight a war if they're being protected by the cloud? So the Rebbe says, Einach Hanami, in this particular detail, the chutzpah that the Kanani had actually led him to an absolute shtus, to something acting in a very, very foolish way. He also could have figured that maybe the Yidden will go out of the cloud to go and fight with him, especially based on what Rashi said earlier, that the Kanani over here is really Amalek. And Amalek had experience from before already fighting with the Yidden, those that were expelled from the cloud. And we also know about Amalek that even when the rest of the Goyim were afraid to start up with the Yidden, Amalek is the one that jumps in and fights with the Yidden, like the person jumping into the hot bath even though he's burnt. And therefore Amalek / Knani over here once again is trying to start up with the Yidden in a way where he's just going to jump into it, notwithstanding the fact that the Yidden are being protected by the Anan. But what he thought was, and not the ability didn't change. What he thought was that he has more reshus now because Hashem removed the cover, the honor, and therefore maybe Hashem is not protecting the Yidden in that way any much. Doesn't have the same sort of love to the Yidden as before. The Rebbe now again preempts another question. The Rebbe says we could ask a question. This difference that we're saying between Anani HaKavod and plain Anonim, says the Rebbe we could ask, Rashi had said earlier, Rashi says, that I think it's later actually, Rashi says that the Anani Kavod, I believe it's in Parshas Ekev, Rashi says that these Anani Kavod, Hayushafim B'ksusam, they would rub the clothes and press the clothes. And also, says Rashi, the little children, as they would grow, the clothes would grow along with them. Now, both of these ideas that Rashi seems to be saying about the Anani HaKavod are regarding things that are part of the necessities of a person. It's not just honor. A person does need clothes, clean clothes, and the clothes growing, etc. So why is Rashi in that case also calling it Anani HaKavod? In truth, however, says the Rebbe, it's not a question at all. Why? Because first of all, this idea that we're saying that the little children, as they grew, the clothes grew along with them, so simply, this is actually not part of what we're saying the Anani HaKavod did. Because what connection with the fact that their clothes are growing with them have anything to do with the Anani HaKavod? Rather, Rashi, when he is speaking about the general idea of clothes, of how it worked with the clothes of the Yidden in the Midbar, so Rashi is telling us about another miracle that happened that the clothes grew along with them, but it has nothing to do with the clouds. That just has to do with their own bodies. And as Rashi says, in that Rashi, where Rashi speaks about this, Rashi says, like the shell or the clothing of a snail that grows along with it. And the reason why Rashi is bringing it in continuation to the idea of the Anani HaKavod cleaning their clothes is simply because otherwise you could have a very, very obvious question. It's all very nice and well that the adults are able to continuously wear the same clothes because their clothes aren't being worn out and the clouds are cleaning them, etc. But what about the little children? Clearly cannot be wearing, as they're growing older, those clothes that they wore as little children. So therefore Rashi tells us immediately that Hashem showed them another nes, that the clothes grew along with them. Now, what about the fact that the Anani HaKavod cleaned their clothes? And why is it that we said seemingly it's a necessity? So why is Rashi calling it Anani HaKavod? It says the Rebbe it actually was not a necessity. Because even without the Anani HaKavod, the Yidden in the Midbar could have managed to clean their clothes, to rub their clothes, to press their clothes in the regular way, without a miracle. The Rebbe says similar to the concept of Simlos Choloi Bolso, the fact that their clothes did not wear out. This also wasn't an absolute must. It wasn't a nest that they absolutely had to have. Because the Yidden could have gotten new clothes in other ways. Either from the many clothes that they took along with them when they left Mitzrayim, or taking from the wool of the sheep that they had lots of cattle with them and sheep with them, or buy clothes from every once in a while when they passed by different places, different cities and so on. So therefore, in a similar way, they could have also cleaned their clothes. Now, the fact that the clouds nevertheless went ahead and rubbed and pressed their clothes, and because it's not a necessity, it's just to sort of help the Yidden not have to have an extra little bother, so that itself is the ultimate sign of true kavod, true honor, how much Hashem loves and honors the Yidden by even providing this service, so to speak, of taking care of their clothes, even though it wasn't a necessity, and that's why, of course, it's called Anani HaKavod. Says the Rebbe, what we still need to understand is, since Rashi says that Botlo HaBe'er, that the Be'er was finally completely gone when Moshe Rabbeinu passes away, it seems to be that Rashi is accepting this idea that when the well had come back after Miriam, it was in the schus of Moshe, as we said earlier. So why then do the Ananei HaKavod not come back in the Schus of Moshe? We just finished saying in this whole Sicha that the regular clouds never left. The Ananei HaKavod that left when Aaron passed away don't come back. There's no necessity for them. But why don't they come back in the Schus of Moshe? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is as follows. According to Pshuti Shel Mikra, everything that the Yidden get through Moshe is different to the things that they get in the schus of Aaron and Miriam. By Aaron and Miriam, we're saying that the Yidden are getting the clouds of glory or the water in the schus of such great people like Aaron and Miriam. With Moshe, it's different. Moshe, being the faithful shepherd of the Yidden, makes sure that the Yidden have everything that they need. And when they need it. In other words, it's not about the schus of Moshe. Moshe, as Roy and Ammon, ensures that the Yidden have everything they need. Says that Rebbe, according to this, is very geschmack that we see that this idea that Moshe takes care of the Yidden, their needs, and it's not, as we said, a matter of schus. When you say a matter of schus, or when the person whose schus everything was in passed away, so now those things are gone. But rather, Moshe Rabbeinu, he as the Roy Ne'eman is giving them things. It's in a way that he's making sure that he ensures that they have these things even after he passes away. Either that they don't need those, either that they have those things, or there's a situation where they don't need those things anymore. And the Rebbe explains, even though we said, yes, when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, the Be'er stops producing this water, but it's only because the Yidden don't need the water anymore, because they're already standing at the Yarden. And so too regarding the man, Rashi says that when Moshe Rabbeinu passes away in Zayin Adar, the man stops coming down. But the Yidden still continue benefiting from the man and eating from the man that they got on Zayin Adar all the way until the 16th day of Nisan, more than a month later, when they bring the Omer in Eretz Yisrael, and they now start having the grain of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, from this we have a very powerful lesson in regards to the Nesiyah Yisrael in every single generation, that even after their passing, when Be'enei Basar we don't see the Hashpah in an open and revealed way. Like the man after the passing of Moshe, you have a look in the world and you don't see that man is coming down. Nevertheless, there's a famous klal about Nesiyah Yisrael, that lo yipardu, they don't separate from their flock. And not only because of the idea of Afkan Oimedu Mishamish Mimorim, that he's right now also still doing for us up in heaven, but that's something that we cannot see Be'enei Basar necessarily, but rather, says the Rebbe, that the actual pu'ulas, the actual things that they had accomplished for Yidden during their lifetime continue to go on. And we continue to benefit from them even after the passing from this physical world. Says the Rebbe, this has a special connection with the Chag HaGeula of my father-in-law, of the Frierdiker Rebbe of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, which falls out in many years, and also the year that Rebbe is saying the Sicha in the week of Shabbos Parshas Chukas, getting the bracha from that Shabbos, because this idea is specifically noticeable in the Geula of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says we see clearly how the Nitzachon and Geula of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz back then had an effect that even in that country, referring to Russia, there should be the strengthening of Torah and spreading of Yiddishkeit, etc. And how that's a Pu'ula Nimshechas, that's something that's an ongoing Pu'ula ad hayoyim hazeh till this very day. This had set up, says the Rebbe, 3 generations of Yidden of Shoymrei Torah or Mitzvah in that country. Which, as we know, once there's 3 generations, as Torah Paskins, lo yamushu mipicho, mipizaracho, mipizerezaracho, once you have yourself, your children, and your children's children, me'ata v'adoilam, it's forever and ever. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, we see that even those people that for a number of generations, Rahman al-Islam, were torn away from Torah and Yiddishkeit because of the terrible conditions in that country. Nevertheless, even they benefit and get from the Pu'ula of the Geula, again, up until this day, that right now it's being ma'oder them with a Tnuah of Tshuva, that they return to a life of Torah and Yiddishkeit. Says the Rebbe, and through the when we go ahead and we'll do properly in the Pu'ulos of the Chag HaGeula, to strengthen Torah and Yiddishkeit, and to spread them, including also B'inyan Shazman Grama, spreading Chassidus, Hafat Samayanis Chutza. This will bring Ka'asi Mardo Malka Mashiach, B'meheira V'yameinu, Amen.